Welcome back, drama hunters. And if you're new here, a huge welcome to the Daily Drama Stories, your ultimate destination for jaw-dropping true stories of HOA overreach and the epic battles against it. Before we dive into today's unbelievable tale, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you're always the first to find out when our latest daily drama hits the screen. All right, let's get into this video. Mike Carter, a man of 69, found himself standing on the porch of the large lakeside cabin he now owned. It was a place steeped in his family's history, a place where he had spent every summer of his childhood. And now it was his. His father, a man who had lived to a ripe old age of 101, had left it to him in his will. The cabin, a sprawling log structure, sat on a majestic 20-acre plot of land, with 4 acres of it stretching 2 acres out into the pristine lake. It was a place of serene beauty, a sanctuary of tranquility far from the clamor of city life. Mike, having recently retired from a long and distinguished career as an FBI analyst specializing in property law and HOA overreach, was looking forward to a peaceful retirement here. He had inherited more than just a cabin. He had inherited a legacy, and with it, a profound sense of responsibility. His father, a man of quiet strength and deep wisdom, had left him 2 boats, a 5-year-old sailboat that could comfortably carry 6 people, and a magnificent 1-year-old electric yacht that could hold up to 10. Both were moored at a beautiful dock, a testament to his father's love for the water and his meticulous care for his property. The property was entirely off-grid, a fact that Mike took great pride in. It was a self-sustaining haven, a testament to his father's foresight and ingenuity. The property was situated right next to a sprawling protected wetland, a vibrant ecosystem teeming with life. 2 miles down the road past the wetlands was a new development of 100 houses called the Lake Edge Community. It was run by the Lake Edge Homeowners Association, a body controlled with an iron fist by a woman named Brenda Peterson. Mike had heard whispers about her, stories of her tyrannical rule and her insatiable thirst for control. He knew that Brenda, or Karen as she was known to many, was trying to get all the homes in the area to join her HOA using any means necessary. But Mike had no intention of joining. His property was not part of their development, and he had no desire to be under the thumb of an organization he knew was a magnet for power-hungry individuals. He had spent his entire career fighting against the kind of overreach that Brenda embodied, and he wasn't about to let it happen on his own doorstep. What he didn't know, however, was that Brenda had a secret agenda. She was trying to get her company to buy up all the lakeside homes to sell the land to a developer, and she stood to make a cool $1 million from the deal. Mike's property, with its prime lake frontage, was the jewel in her crown, the one piece of the puzzle she needed to complete her plan. The first sign of trouble came on a bright sunny morning. Mike was out on his dock, polishing the gleaming hull of the electric yacht, when a golf cart came rattling down the dirt road that led to his property. A woman, impeccably dressed and with a severe expression on her face, stepped out. It was Brenda Peterson. She introduced herself with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Carter," she began, "I'm Brenda Peterson, president of the Lake Edge Homeowners Association. I just wanted to welcome you to the community." Mike, ever the gentleman, offered her a cup of coffee. She declined, her smile tightening. "I'm here on official business, Mr. Carter. I've been reviewing the property records, and I've noticed your property isn't part of our HOA. We'd love for you to join us. We offer so many wonderful benefits, community events, a shared clubhouse, and a sense of belonging." Mike, with a polite but firm smile, explained that his property was off-grid and that he preferred his privacy. "My father built this place to be a self-sustaining haven, Brenda. I intend to keep it that way. I appreciate the offer, but I'll have to decline." Brenda's smile vanished. She said, "I see." her voice turning cold. "Well, Mr. Carter, I must inform you that your property is in violation of several of our community covenants. We have a strict rule about off-grid living. It's considered a fire hazard." Mike, a man who had spent his life studying property law, raised an eyebrow. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Brenda. My property is not part of your community, and I am not bound by your covenants. Furthermore, my off-grid system, which includes solar panels and a state-of-the-art battery backup, has been inspected and approved by the county fire marshal. I have the paperwork right here." He held up a thick manila folder. Brenda, her face flushing with anger, snatched the folder from his hand. "I'll be taking this," she said, her voice a low growl. "I'll have my lawyers review it. You'll be hearing from me." She turned on her heel and stomped back to her golf cart, leaving Mike standing on his dock, a silent witness to her petty tyranny. Mike knew this was just the beginning. The battle had been joined, and he was ready for it. He had spent his life fighting for justice, and he wasn't about to let a local Karen bully him out of his home. As he watched her drive away, a line from his father's journal came to mind, a quote he had written down and kept close to his heart. It was a simple yet profound observation that resonated with him deeply. People seem to think they can just take things that they want from other people and not be held accountable. Mike knew that Brenda's actions were a perfect example of this. She thought she could take his property, his peace, and his freedom, and that he would simply stand by and let her do it. She was about to learn a very hard lesson. Mike, a man of quiet determination, knew that he had law on his side, and he had a lifetime of experience fighting people just like her. He knew that the battle for his home was not just about the land, it was about his father's legacy, his own retirement, and the principle that a person's home is their castle, a place where they should be free from the tyranny of others. He knew that he had a fight on his hands, and he was more than ready for it. He spent the rest of the day meticulously cataloging all his father's legal documents, cross-referencing them with his own extensive knowledge of property law. He found a copy of the original deed to his father's property, which clearly stated that the land was not part of any HOA or development. He also found a copy of the county's zoning laws, which explicitly permitted off-grid living. He knew he had a strong case, but he also knew that Brenda wouldn't give up easily. He knew she would try to find any loophole, any obscure bylaw to get what she wanted. He was prepared for a long and arduous battle, but he was not intimidated. He had faced much tougher opponents in his career, and he knew that a person's greed and a thirst for power can make them do foolish things. Brenda was about to learn that she had picked a fight with the wrong person. Mike was not just a retired FBI agent. He was a guardian of his father's legacy, a defender of his home, and a man who would not back down from a bully. Brenda's departure was not the end of the matter, but rather the opening salvo in a protracted campaign of harassment. Mike, with his lifetime of experience analyzing legal minutiae and anticipating the moves of his adversaries, knew this was a classic Karen tactic. They never attacked directly. They probed for weaknesses, launched small, irritating assaults, and try to wear down their target with 1,000 tiny cuts. Mike was not a man to be worn down. He was a rock, a fortress built of common sense and legal precedent, and he had spent his life defending others from people just like Brenda. He also had the advantage of his father's detailed notes and journals, a veritable treasure trove of information about the property and its history, which his father had meticulously documented over a century. Mike spent the next few days not in a state of anxiety, but in a state of controlled preparation. He set up a dedicated folder on his computer, labeling it Project Brenda, and began to compile every piece of documentation he had. The first volley from Brenda came in the form of a certified letter. The envelope was thick, heavy with the weight of official-looking paper. Mike, with a wry smile, opened it. It was from the Lake Edge Homeowners Association, signed by Brenda Peterson, president. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive legalese. It stated in no uncertain terms that his off-grid system was a violation of community aesthetics and a potential public health risk. It cited a fictitious bylaw that required all homes in the vicinity to connect to the community's power grid. It also demanded that he provide a full schematic of his water and septic systems for review and approval. The letter concluded with a threat of fines starting at $500 a day to be levied until he complied. Mike, unbothered, placed the letter in his Project Brenda file. He knew she was bluffing. The term vicinity was legally vague and unenforceable, and he had already confirmed with the county that his off-grid systems were not only up to code, but were a model of sustainable living. He also knew that his property was not part of the Lake Edge community, and therefore their bylaws did not apply to him. Brenda was trying to bully him, to overwhelm him with a blizzard of paperwork and official-sounding threats. Mike's response was swift, simple, and devastatingly effective. He drafted a 2-paragraph letter citing the original deed to his property, which predated the formation of the Lake Edge community. He included a copy of the county's approval for his off-grid systems and a copy of the state's property law, which clearly stated that HOAs have no jurisdiction over properties that are not part of their official community. His letter concluded with a politely worded warning that any further attempts to harass or intimidate him would be met with legal action. He sent the letter via certified mail, just as Brenda had done, and added a copy to his Project Brenda file. Then he went out on his electric yacht and spent the afternoon fishing, the serene lake a stark contrast to the brewing storm. Brenda, however, was not a woman who understood the meaning of the word no. Her greed, fueled by the prospect of $1 million payout, blinded her to the legal realities of the situation. Her next move was more personal. A few days later, a new notice appeared on the bulletin board at the entrance to the Lake Edge community. It was a poorly photocopied picture of Mike's house, with a caption underneath that read, "Unapproved structures and fire hazard at 201 Lakeshore Drive. Report all violations to Brenda Peterson, HOA President." The notice was a transparent attempt to turn the community against him, to stir up a mob of angry homeowners who would see him as a threat to their property values. Mike, who had an old-school informant network from his FBI days, had a friend in the community who saw the notice and promptly took a picture, sending it to him with a single text message, "Brenda's on the warpath." Mike's response was once again deliberate and precise. He didn't confront Brenda directly. Instead, he went to the county courthouse and requested a copy of the Lake Edge community's official charter and bylaws. He spent an entire afternoon poring over the documents, looking for any inconsistencies, any legal loopholes, any evidence of her overreach. What he found was even better than he had hoped. He discovered that the community's bylaws were a legal mess, full of contradictory clauses and poorly defined terms. He also found that the original charter of the HOA did not grant the president the power to unilaterally levy fines or to declare a property a fire hazard. Brenda had been operating with a self-granted authority that she did not legally possess. Mike, ever the analyst, smiled to himself. He had found her weakness. He then drafted a formal complaint to the county's code enforcement office, detailing Brenda's campaign of harassment, her false claims, and her illegal use of the HOA's authority. He attached copies of her certified letter, the bulletin board notice, and his own meticulously documented research. He even included a quote he had found in a book on his father's bookshelf, a quote that perfectly encapsulated Brenda's behavior. "A bully's greatest weakness is their need for an audience." Brenda was not just trying to bully him, she was trying to do it in front of the entire community, to assert her power and authority. Mike was about to turn his audience into his jury. His complaint was a masterpiece of legal precision and strategic thinking. It was not a rant or a complaint, it was a dossier, a detailed account of her illegal actions. He knew that the county, faced with such a well-documented case, would be forced to take action. This was no longer a petty dispute between neighbors. It was a matter of official misconduct, a violation of the very laws that governed the community. Mike had turned the tables on Brenda. She thought she was harassing him, but in reality, she was providing him with all the evidence he needed to expose her. The next day, a county code enforcement officer, a gruff but fair man named Officer Jenkins, showed up at Mike's door. He had the official complaint in his hand and a serious look on his face. He spent an hour with Mike, reviewing his documents, inspecting his off-grid system, and taking pictures of the property. He was impressed with Mike's preparedness and his meticulous attention to detail. He said, "Mr. Carter, I've dealt with a lot of these HOA presidents. They think they're little kings and queens. But this is a whole new level of crazy. Don't you worry, we'll be paying a visit to Miss Peterson." Mike, with a knowing smile, watched him drive away. He knew that the wheels of justice, while they might turn slowly, were now in motion. The buildup had reached its peak, and the stage was set for the inevitable escalation. Brenda, blissfully unaware of the wheels turning against her, doubled down on her campaign of harassment. Mike's polite but firm legal letter and the subsequent visit from Officer Jenkins did not deter her. In her mind, these were merely inconveniences, minor skirmishes in a war she was certain to win. Her greed, now mixed with a potent cocktail of indignation and wounded pride, had completely consumed her. The prospect of her million-dollar payout, a future of exotic vacations and lavish shopping sprees, was too intoxicating to abandon. She saw Mike as not a man with a right to his property, but as an obstacle, a stubborn relic of the past standing in the way of her glorious future. She began to actively seek out ways to make his life a living hell, a strategy born of desperation and a profound lack of foresight. The first true act of escalation came on a Friday afternoon. Mike had planned to take his sailboat out for a leisurely sail, a tradition he and his father had shared for decades. But as he walked down his dock, he saw a sight that made his blood run cold. Both his sailboat and his electric yacht were gone. In their place was a notice from the Lake Edge Homeowners Association, a bright orange sticker plastered to the dock post. The notice, signed by Brenda Peterson, stated that the boats had been impounded for violating a newly implemented bylaw that prohibited unregistered vessels on the lake. Mike, his jaw tight, knew this was a brazen act of theft. His father had registered both boats with the state, and the paperwork was in perfect order. This was not about bylaws, this was about power. About Brenda trying to show him who was in charge. It was a vicious, personal attack on his father's legacy and his own peace of mind. Mike, with the cold, methodical fury of a man who had seen too much injustice, immediately picked up the phone. He didn't call Brenda. He called Officer Jenkins. "Officer," he said, his voice as steady as a rock, "Brenda Peterson has just stolen my boats. I have the state registration numbers right here, and I'm ready to file a police report." Jenkins, who'd already heard about Brenda's latest antics from her own disgruntled neighbors, didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way, Mr. Carter. Don't touch a thing." Within an hour, a sheriff's deputy was at Mike's dock, taking pictures and writing a detailed report. Mike, with the steely resolve, provided him with all the necessary documentation. The deputy, a young man who looked at Mike with a mixture of awe and respect, assured him that they would be investigating this as a grand theft case. Brenda, however, was just getting started. She seemed to be operating under the delusion that if she raised the stakes high enough, Mike would fold. The very next day, a team of landscapers appeared at the edge of his property, right where it met the protected wetlands. They were under orders from Brenda to reclaim the land for the community, claiming that Mike's property line had been incorrectly drawn and that a significant portion of his land, including a large swath of the wetlands, actually belonged to the Lake Edge community. They began cutting down a line of ancient willow trees, a natural buffer that had been there for a century. Mike, a man who had a deep reverence for nature, saw red. He raced out of his cabin, the official survey map from the county in his hand. He confronted the landscapers, a group of confused and intimidated young men, and showed them the legal documents that proved his property line was exactly where it was supposed to be. They, realizing they were on the wrong side of the law, packed up their equipment and left. Mike, standing on the edge of his property, looked at the swath of destruction and felt a surge of rage. He knew that this wasn't just an attack on him, it was an attack on the land, on the very ecosystem his father had spent a lifetime protecting.
He called his lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman he had known for years from his FBI days. He explained the situation, and she, with a grim determination, advised him to file for a restraining order against Brenda Peterson. "Mike," she said, her voice full of authority, "she's a danger to herself and to others. She's crossing a line and she needs to be stopped." Mike agreed, and within a day, the court had issued a temporary restraining order against Brenda Peterson, prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of Mike's property and from contacting him in any way. The order was served by the sheriff's deputy, who, with a grim smile, handed the document to a flabbergasted Brenda. This was a significant blow, a public and official declaration that she was a bully who had gone too far. Brenda, however, was not one to be deterred by a simple restraining order. Her greed had clouded her judgment, and her desire for the million-dollar payday had become an obsession. She saw the restraining order not as a warning, but as a challenge. She had one final desperate play, one last roll of the dice. She called a special emergency meeting of the Lake Edge Homeowners Association, claiming that Mike's property was in a state of gross neglect and was decreasing the property values of the entire community. She presented a series of photos she had doctored to show his property in a state of disrepair, with overgrown weeds, broken fences, and general squalor. She demanded that the HOA vote to file a suit against Mike, forcing him to sell his property to the community at a fair market value. The majority of the homeowners, however, were not the simple-minded drones that she had imagined them to be. Many had grown tired of her tyrannical rule, and some had even seen the bulletin board notice and the subsequent visit from Officer Jenkins. They were suspicious of her motives, and they were tired of being her pawns. Just as Brenda was about to call for a vote, a man stood up. It was Frank Rodriguez, a retired judge who had lived in the community for decades and who had a reputation for being a quiet but unshakable force for justice. He held up a copy of the original deed to Mike's property, a document Mike had given him to him earlier that day. "Brenda," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, "I've reviewed the original deed to Mr. Carter's property. The land, including the protected wetlands, was deeded to his father long before this community was ever conceived. Furthermore, the deed explicitly states that the property is not and never shall be part of any homeowners association. You have no legal standing to sue Mr. Carter, and your attempts to harass him are a gross violation of his property rights and the law." He then read a quote from his own notebook, a quote that perfectly summed up Brenda's misguided power trip. "Power, when it gets a taste of its own potential, becomes a monster that devours reason one bite at a time." The room fell silent. Brenda, her face pale with shock and fury, looked at the crowd. She had lost her audience, and with it, her power. The stage was set for her downfall. Brenda's reign of terror was over. The emergency meeting, which she had intended to be her final triumphant power play, had instead become her public and humiliating downfall. Judge Rodriguez's calm, irrefutable declaration had shattered her illusion of authority, and the community, no longer cowed by her threats, turned on her. A wave of murmurs and whispers, a sound like 100 tiny nails being hammered into her coffin, swept through the room. The homeowners, empowered by Mike's quiet strength and Judge Rodriguez's legal acumen, began to speak up, sharing their own stories of Brenda's harassment and overreach. The meeting which she had called to condemn Mike had instead become an unofficial tribunal, a public reckoning for all of her misdeeds. Brenda, her face a mask of shock and fury, fled the room, her dreams of $1 million payday evaporating like a morning mist.
Mike's victory was not just a personal one. It was a victory for the entire community. The day after the meeting, Officer Jenkins and a team of county officials arrived at Brenda's office. Armed with a search warrant, they began to sift through her files. They found a mountain of evidence, doctored documents, forged bylaws, and a detailed plan to sell the Lakeside properties to a developer. They also found the 2 boats, his father's precious vessels, hidden in a community storage unit. The grand theft charge was now a very real threat. Brenda, faced with the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, had no choice but to cooperate. She confessed to her scheme, detailing her plan to bully the Lakeside homeowners into selling their properties. She was immediately arrested, and the Lake Edge Homeowners Association, now in a state of chaos and disarray, was forced to elect a new, temporary board. Mike's life, however, was not immediately returned to normal. He had his boats back, But the damage to his property, the psychological toll of the harassment, and the public nature of the ordeal had left a mark. He knew that justice, while it had been served, was not a magic balm that could instantly heal all wounds. He spent the next few weeks meticulously repairing the damage to his property, replanting the destroyed willow trees, and restoring his off-grid system to its former glory. He was not alone in his efforts. One by one, the homeowners from the Lake Edge community began to show up at his cabin, offering their apologies and their help. They had seen his quiet courage, his unshakable integrity, and they wanted to show their gratitude. They helped him with the repairs, brought him home-cooked meals, and shared stories of their own battles with Brenda. Mike, a man who had chosen a life of solitude, found himself embraced by a community he had initially sought to avoid. In the end, Brenda's greed was her undoing. Her obsession with the million-dollar payout, her relentless pursuit of power, and her complete disregard for the law and for the rights of others had led to her spectacular downfall. Mike, a man who had dedicated his life to fighting for justice, had triumphed. He had not only saved his home and his father's legacy, but he had also exposed a corrupt and predatory scheme that had threatened to destroy an entire community. He had proven that one man, armed with knowledge, integrity, and a quiet resolve, could stand up to a bully and win. He had shown that a home is not just a house, it is a fortress of freedom, a sanctuary of peace, and a place where a person's rights should be sacrosanct. He had also found something he hadn't expected: a sense of belonging, a connection to a community that had seen him not as an outsider, but as their champion. As he stood on his newly repaired dock, looking out at the shimmering expanse of the lake, he thought of a quote from one of his father's old books, a quote he had recently found and kept close to his heart. "A home is not just a structure of wood and stone, it is a repository of memories, a fortress of dreams, and a sanctuary of peace. To defend it is not just a right, but a sacred duty." Mike, with a knowing smile, looked out at the peaceful lake, the sun glinting off the water. He had fulfilled his sacred duty. He had defended his home, honored his father's legacy, and in the process had found a new purpose in his retirement. The battle was over, and the peace he had so desperately sought was finally his. Thanks for watching this episode from Daily Drama Stories. I hope you enjoyed it. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I would love to know how far our videos spread. We have a lot of great stories coming your way, so keep checking back. Before you go, please like the video and subscribe. It doesn't cost anything, but it means a lot to me. Have a wonderful day, and remember, help each other and don't let the bullies win.